David, thank you very much for calling them all to order. Good morning, everybody. I'm Sara Thornton, the chair of the Police Foundation, and I give you a very warm welcome to this event today on a very sunny St George's Day, so happy St George's Day. There's a little leaflet on every chair which explains that the Police Foundation is the only independent think tank focused exclusively on improving policing and developing knowledge and understanding of policing and crime. While research remains a really important part of our work, I think we also add real value by convening events like today, bringing together policymakers, civil society, business, police officers of all ranks and grades, the media and many other stakeholders. And you all, when Blair said to me a few months ago that he'd persuaded Bill to come and do an event on broken windows, I was absolutely delighted. And I told Blair, I shared with Blair the fact that actually when I think I was either an inspector or chief inspector in the Met in 1996, a group of us, led by Brian Hayes, the then Deputy Commissioner, were sent by Commissioner Paul Condon to the NYPD to look at how they'd reduced crime so successfully under Bill's leadership in that first period, 94 to 96. And we were sent because those reductions had really caught the attention of the world, and both the Commissioner in the Met, but also political leaders were very keen for us to go and understand what was happening. And I'm a bit of a hoarder, I must confess. And so I did find some papers and some things that I wrote at the time, and I thought I would just share those with you. And three observations as I looked at the papers. The first thing that struck me was your absolute focus on crime reduction. And there were these sort of four slogans which everybody throughout the organisation would repeat: accurate and timely intelligence, effective tactics, rapid deployment, relentless follow-up. And I think 30 years ago it was something that really struck me, the way in which the NYPD was using data to inform operations in a way I just don't think we were doing in the UK. So that was the first thing. But to the theme of today, the Reclaiming the Street strategy, as it was called, which tackled quality of life issues, was just one of 8 strategies, but it was the one I think that really captured our attention on that visit. That sense in which low-level offences impacted on the public's sense of safety and security, but also creates the conditions in which more serious crimes can flourish. And what struck me, and I wrote it at the time, was not just the way in which officers were expected to do this, but actually having gone on several ride-alongs, the way in which officers often felt empowered because they were having impact, which I thought was interesting. But of course, the glue, the great enabler of all this was the ComStat process and that focus on reducing crime and on reducing quality of life issues. And on our visit, we went twice. And it was extremely theatrical, 150 people squashed into a rather gloomy room. And my memories are still very, very vivid. What I wrote at the time, and I would say my experience bore this out, is that I thought that it created an intimacy in a large organisation. And all my experiences of doing performance groups in Thames Valley for over 10 years is that actually it was such a powerful vehicle for connecting the leadership with operations in a way I haven't seen other kind of meetings, other structures doing so. So coming back, of course, we had to write papers on what we thought was the sort of transferability to the Met. And of course, it was never going to be a copy and paste from the NYPD to London, of course, because we spent a lot of time saying there's a lot more crime over there than there is here for a start. And maybe tolerance over there is a different issue. But I do think we can trace the influence of what was happening under Bill's leadership on UK policing over the last 30 years. I think in particular, actually, when we think about the quality of life issues, a lot of my thinking about neighbourhood policing and community safety was very much influenced by those issues about the link between the everyday and the more serious. And I'm going to chair a panel shortly, and I'm very pleased to have a couple of serving chiefs with me, so I will leave them to comment on broken windows' relevance today. But can I just say, as a layperson, Having listened to Radio 4 this morning, all about the issues of our high streets with their vape shops, the barbers, the mini-marts, the takeaways run by organised crime groups, the sense in which you can just rock up to these mini-marts apparently and buy cannabis and order your cocaine, and the seeming epidemic of shoplifting and fare evasion, it does seem to me that it's the right time to look at broken windows again. So I'm very excited for the discussion today, and I'm going to hand over to the Director, Blair, who's going to lead the first session. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this important event. I'm the Director of the Police Foundation, and it's a real pleasure to see so many of you here for this discussion on a tube strike day as well. Thank you for taking the time out. So why are we talking about broken windows again and the police experience in America? Well, really for me this is about an exchange of ideas and the relevance of our different but connected policing traditions. In the 15 years or so that I've had the privilege to know our main speaker today, Bill Bratton, I've learned, of course, about his love of this country and its traditions and the deference that he pays to the origins of the democratic policing model that, of course, started in this city and which survives to this day. And a few months ago, I actually reminded Bill that, although it probably doesn't feel like it to him, it's about 30 years, almost to the day this month, that he left New York as police commissioner for the first time. And with him in London, wouldn't it be a good idea to reflect and have a bit of a retrospective as well as think about some of the things he's done since and how that might apply. So that's the point of the discussion today. And of course, Bill is now the executive chairman of the risk advisory practice at Teneo, which I'm told has a large office in London with over 300 staff. And of course, he continues to advise major companies and even governments on security and policing. And he's actually this week in London as well for his work with the Police Leadership Commission, where he's a member of the commission established by the Home Secretary last year. But of course, it's Bill's policing legacy, as Sara said, that is his real importance for the discussion today and for policing in the UK. So obviously, that 2 years in the NYPD would become a defining period for policing in America, and the crime drop was unprecedented. It continued for over 20 years, and that turnaround was both in terms of serious violence and also disorder. And then, of course, Bill went on to lead the Los Angeles Police Department for over 7 years and repeating that success with far fewer resources. And then, very unusually, came back to the NYPD to serve a second term as commissioner, retiring in 2016. So we're really honoured to have you with us here today, Bill, and looking forward to your remarks. Now, throughout his distinguished career, he's embraced a number of policing philosophies. In a speech in 2011, he said, "One of the great things about the profession of policing is that it's always changing." However, I think what stands out to me is however much technology has changed policing and society around it, the broken windows philosophy feels enduring. The idea still rings true to many people, and I think intuitively it feels like at least a sensible operating model. That safety means you have to pay attention to small-scale disorders, lest they create the conditions that make more serious offending more likely. And this idea is the same today as it was 50 or so years ago, but we all know the 1982 Atlantic Monthly article. That was where the term was coined, written by George Kelling and James Q. Wilson, further developed in Kelling's book, Fixing Broken Windows, the title of this event, from 1996. And it describes really an older policing idea, which I think Bill adopted. He'll talk about his time before going to New York, and arguably even older than that, going back to some of the Pelian principles from the early 19th century in terms of what the new police at the time were tasked with preventing, both crime and disorder. Now, the late James Q. Wilson, who was really the guru of crime policy in the post-war era, was quoted, and he argued that there was something bigger and more important behind the broken windows story. He said in 2011, "Bill Bratton made a huge difference, but people mistake what the change was. They say he adopted the broken windows theory. Well, I'm not sure he did, and if he did, I'm not sure how much of a difference it made to the crime rate. What he really did, his fundamental contribution, was to persuade the police that your job was not to make arrests, your job is to prevent crime." So what is the link between broken windows and this focus on prevention? How influential was it in this country? Have we preferred to do something different? Have we evolved it ourselves and developed it in a new direction? And how relevant is it to the policing challenges today? Joining Bill to discuss the political and policy implications and to sort of fill in this picture, if you like, about the transatlantic exchange, we're very lucky to also have David Blunkett with us. Now, Lord Blunkett, as many of you will know, was Home Secretary under the last Labour government, was instrumental in making this country safer from terrorism after the 9/11 attacks. And he has kindly agreed to be interviewed alongside Bill now as we look back at those years in order to think more clearly about the future. And then there will be a chance for audience questions following our discussion. And as Sara said, we're going to have an expert panel to follow that who will be able to reflect on what they've heard and bring in an academic and practitioner perspective. So for now, can you join me in welcoming David Blunkett and Bill Bratton? I want to begin on this theme of exchange. And you told me that way back in the 1970s, I think, you were in Boston, and in fact, in your book, The Profession, you talk about the connection here, but you were unaware of the Peelian principles until there was an opportunity to meet a visitor from out of town. Can you say a bit about how you first heard about this? And I think it was 1975?
That's correct. In 75, I had been recently promoted as a sergeant in the Boston Police Department. I was the youngest sergeant at that time in the history of that department. I believe I was 27 years of age. The average age of sergeants in the Boston Police Department at that time was 47. So I was certainly from a new generation. And the police commissioner, that's my significant hero, if you will, and inspiration, was Robert DeGrazia, a tremendous change agent who changed my life, certainly, and helped to eventually change policing in the United States. He had invited Sir Robert Mark up to his office. Sir Robert Mark was visiting the Police Foundation at that time, Patrick Murphy, and I was invited up to a coffee session with him. I actually have a picture of it in my files. And in that conversation, he talked about the history of the Met, the history of policing, and the origins of democratic policing. And the origins are, and I carry this, or copies of it everywhere, the Peelian Principles. 1829, Sir Robert Peel, at that time the equivalent of Home Secretary, created it. And as was discussed, the Met was created to reclaim the streets of London that were increasingly going out of control, not only with serious crime, but with very visible disorder. And I was fascinated with the Peelian Principles, and I encourage those of you who have not looked at them in a while, Google them. You will see that they are more pertinent and appropriate today than they were in 1829. They are the platform upon which I have stood for now over 50 years, and I'm a strong believer in it. But the most significant one, I believe, of the 9 is the first. The basic mission for which the police exist is, and Dame Thornton mentioned in her comment, is to prevent crime and disorder, the 5 most important words in the criminal justice system as it relates to policing. To prevent, not measure our success by our response after the fact, but how are we doing in preventing in the first place? And the understanding that Peel had back in 1829, that only in America did we come to recognize it in the 1990s, that you had to focus not only on serious crime, but the causes or the influences on serious crime, which was disorder. And we had given up on it in the 70s and 80s, and I believe you gave up on it in the same period of time, that you gave up on dealing with disorder to focus on crime and focus on the response to it rather than prevention. So what I became instrumental in was refocusing attention back on crime and disorder. And I owe all that, in some respects, to the inspiration that Sir Robert Mark provided in 1975.
Thank you. So that exchange had been going on long before you took the role as commissioner. When you first went to the transit police as well, how hard was it to get the organisation to shift into that prevention sort of mindset?
Again, Dame Thornton mentioned in her comments about police wanting to perform. And in the NYPD in particular, and in American policing in the 70s and 80s, we were removed from any responsibility for the prevention of crime because it was assumed and believed by many academics, many political leaders, and by police chiefs that we could not do anything about the prevention of crime. We needed to focus on response. So we changed from the centuries of focus on our mission was the prevention to response. And it totally changed everything. We effectively removed ourselves from the responsibility for the prevention of it. But coming back into the period of the 90s, we returned to that role. That was a significant shift. And in terms of the officers wanted to engage. In the city of New York, they were literally prevented from engaging in dealing with disorder, particularly something that you're being plagued with right now in your country based on the BBC this morning, the prevalence of narcotic sales throughout your country, visible narcotic sale in your smoke shops, your vape shops. We were flooded with that in New York in the 1990s. 15,000 identified drug locations, 8,000 open air, 7,000 indoor locations selling drugs. Why? Uniformed police officers were prohibited because of fear of corruption from interfering with drug dealing that was going on directly in front of them. Or when the public would call 911 to report a drug dealer on my corner or in my park or in my subway station, investigators were the only ones authorized to deal with it. Uniformed officers were prohibited from dealing with it. So what satisfaction that provided the public when they saw the uniformed cop going by what they had just called to complain about. And imagine that, your police officers being told to not enforce the drug laws. And that was the state of policing in America and New York in particular in 1990.
Thank you. So in your latest book, you say that broken windows has become an activist shorthand for racist police behaviour and zero-tolerance policing. It is neither. Do you think some of your ideas around this have been lost in translation over the years, and how do we fix that?
I like that expression, lost in translation. That what's the expression? We're divided only by a common language in terms of between Great Britain and the United States. I believe that there's been a conscious effort to connect broken windows, quality of life policing, with the now significantly challenged, both in my country as well as yours, the issue around stop, question, and frisk. Recently in the papers these last several days in your country, several stories about the large amount of stop, question, and frisk, that a black is 8 times more likely than a white to be stopped and frisked by your police. Similarly, in the United States, that during a period of time under my predecessor, Ray Kelly, the number of stop, question, and frisks by the NYPD dramatically increased up to about 700,000 documented by 2013. And the public, particularly the minority public, was really rebelling against it. But they attributed so much of that stop, question, and frisk around issues of particularly young minority males being stopped for minor infractions, quality of life, so-called broken windows types of events, crime and disorder. In my country, that there is a distinct difference, however, between broken windows, quality of life, stop, question, and frisk. Stop, question, and frisk was effectively authorized by the Supreme Court in 1968 by a very famous case, Terry versus Ohio. I can still remember distinctly my first class in 1970 as a young recruit was stop, question, frisk. That if a police officer has reasonable suspicion, he may stop a person, he may inquire of them, and if he feels there's a potential threat to his safety or the safety of people around them, that he may frisk that individual. There are many fewer frisks than actual stops, but the 3 terms have been squished into one that is basically frisking, and you're going through that right now in your country. The other issue of broken windows policing is totally different. Why is it totally different? Why did Sir Robert Peel create the British Bobby in his uniform and his high helmet and his copper buttons? Was to effectively prevent by his presence minor crime or disorder. And that was his mission. But he was also under broken windows. In my country, it is a higher degree of probable cause in our law. Probable cause in that the officer has seen, has been apprised by a victim of crime that a crime has occurred. So he has a higher standard to respond to. So two different levels of law, if you will. And the ability to try and compare the two in my country has gained great foothold, unfortunately, because broken windows policing is the basic mission of the police. It is to, if an officer sees a crime being committed, to take action. In 1990s in New York, the officers were discouraged from taking action against drug dealing on the streets in front of them. And so the idea of, going back, Blair, to your initial question, you want your officers, as Sir Robert Peel did, to engage. And particularly if you've got now a witness or a victim of crime, that the officer is able to take action. And so in American policing, the turnaround began in the 1990s when we once again started to use our officers to engage in taking back the streets, which had gotten totally out of control.
And zero tolerance was picked up, I believe, here in the
Shame on you for using
period,
that term.
Yeah, I think you used the term in respect of police corruption, though. Was that the sort of mistaken carryover there?
Some of you in this room are probably too young or too new to the issue of criminal justice to recall that in the 1990s, early 21st century in your country, there was a great embrace of the term zero tolerance, that you were going to have zero tolerance against crime and disorder. And there were books written about it. George Kelling and I actually had to write a book disputing the use of the term, because the term zero tolerance was one that we used in the 8 strategies that we used to turn around crime in New York City. Those strategies were dealing with domestic violence, robberies, youth crime, police corruption. The only one of those 8 strategies that we used the term zero tolerance was for police corruption, that you must have zero tolerance for police corruption or misbehavior. You have no ability to effectively have zero tolerance for all other types of crime, because it's an unachievable goal. And by effectively a form of zealotry, having zero tolerance, it effectively creates in the public a sense of an unexpected, a reality that can't be reached, and encourages officers to sometimes go outside the boundaries of the laws they're supposed to work with. The term was brought here to your country by Jack Straw, your shadow Home Secretary, who, like Dame Thornton in 1995, visited me as the police commissioner to see this New York miracle. Why was crime going down so dramatically in New York City, which is oftentimes compared with London? And he was struck by the term. He loved the term and basically brought it back to your country. And so your efforts going after crime and broken windows type of crime embrace the term zero tolerance. And again, we use it in the United States only for police corruption. So that was the background on that term and how you came to embrace it.
Okay, so another thing that you're famous for, Bill, is the ComStat approach, which I believe the NYPD still uses, and this idea of devolving responsibility. I think there were 75 precinct commanders that were empowered, and then holding them accountable for what was happening to crime in front of each other at regular performance meetings. I looked back at so that you mentioned 1829, so in the new police instructions that were printed in the Times newspaper at the time, the final line is, "Officers and constables should endeavour to distinguish themselves by such vigilance and activity as may render it impossible for anyone to commit a crime within that portion of the town under their charge." And I thought about that in terms of ComStat. There was very much a focus, wasn't there, on owning a certain precinct and having accountability at that level. How important was that in the turnaround story for New York?
ComStat that Dame Thornton referenced and was so impressed with, and as was Jack Straw when he visited, truly was a concept that changed American policing and indeed influenced policing around the world in a very short period of time. Why? Because it was successful after 25 years of lack of success in dealing with crime rates going up significantly in your country, my country, and particularly in major cities. It had 4 basic elements to it that so much common sense when we think about it today, but back then it was revolutionary. The idea that police could actually do something about crime, and most importantly, return to the Peelian principle of taking responsibility for preventing it. Because in the 70s and 80s, police were excused from the prevention of crime because we believed that crime was caused by the economy, by the weather, by societal issues. And what could the police be expected to do about that while governments wrestle with how do we take care of the poor, how do we take care of the minority issues, how do we take care of what we believe are causes of crime? The cause of crime, from my perspective, my experience in the 70s and 80s, as I was growing up in policing, was quite simple. Criminals. People who break the law intentionally, many of them, or others who unintentionally end up in a moment of passion, commit a crime or an offense. And so the focus had moved away from controlling behavior to excusing it. And what we returned to with CompStat was, one, I, as the police commissioner, said, I will basically reduce crime by 10%. That was unheard of. No police chief in America had ever committed to a goal, a numerical goal of reduction of crime, and none of them, up until the 90s, were committing to reducing crime. They were focused instead on better response time, more arrests after the fact, clearance rates, as we call it. So in the 90s, with the development of CompStat, CompStat was focused on crime and disorder, with the education of our precinct commanders that the disorder that they've been neglecting dealing with, they were now empowered and, in fact, encouraged to deal with. Have your officers break up that drug dealing on the park bench, on the street corner, in the subway. And that your precinct, and there were 75 of them in New York, average of basically 100,000 residents, 300 police officers, that you are going to be now held accountable for doing something about crime and disorder. And the system that we were going to use to analyze and hold you accountable was CompStat. And Dame Thornton mentioned the 4 elements of it. And just think of how basic this is, and think of it from a medical perspective, what a doctor does with you every year. Timely, accurate intelligence, the idea of gathering up crime information every day, putting up on a map, and very quickly, after a week or 2 weeks, you start seeing clusters, hotspots, where crime is basically focused in a precinct. Secondly, rapidly respond to that evolving hotspot. Think of it, a doctor examines you, he spots something on you, he basically does a biopsy, and sure enough, he detects a cancer. What does he do? He rapidly responds with effective tactics. He might just freeze it, unfortunately might have to remove it surgically. But then what is the 4th element? Relentless follow-up. Even after he has taken care of your illness, even as we've begun to reduce the crime, continue to follow up as to what has been working, what medicine, if you will, has worked. And the beauty of CompStat, and again it was referenced in the opening remarks, is the collaboration, the sharing. Policing is historically a very inclusive and very exclusive profession. That within the profession we like to think we share information. We don't, or did not. And external, we try to share as little information as possible with the public unless it's good news. And so the idea is that with CompStat, which in New York City basically was put up on our website, you could basically see down to your neighborhood address what's been happening in your neighborhood. So it was the idea of inclusiveness around the issue of crime. And it goes back to Sir Robert Peel's 9 principle. The police are the public and the public are the police. Police can't do it by themselves. The public certainly cannot do it by themselves. But collaboratively, we can get so much done. Collaboratively, see something, say something. See something, a police officer, do something. Because in the 70s and 80s, in many agencies, they were discouraged from doing anything. So CompStat, if you think of the medical profession, what is the expression? Their goal to do no harm, although we authorize them to cut us up and give them all types of chemo and radiation and medicines. In policing, going back to Sir Robert Peel's guidelines, the success of police is by the absence of the police being seen enforcing the law. Why? Because effectively they have prevented crime disorder from occurring in the first place. So we don't see them arresting or, unfortunately on occasion, brutalizing people because they've effectively taken it under control. So CompStat is then and now, it's as much about accountability that as a precinct commander, if you're not getting crime and disorder down after sharing all the ideas with your fellow precinct commanders, well, time to get a different seat on the bus. That you shouldn't be a precinct commander. You might be great at some things, but you're not great at crime control and crime reduction. So it does require a constant shuffling of personnel to put them into the right seats on the bus.
Great, thank you, Bill, for that. I want to turn to Lord Blunkett now and get a little bit more context on this exchange, if you like. So, as Bill mentioned already, David, when you became Home Secretary in 2001, your predecessor, Jack Straw, had already been out to New York. When you took on the role of Home Secretary, what sort of appealed to you about the New York experience and the Bratton story? And if you can recollect, what was the sort of reaction, if you like, in the Home Office at the time to some of these ideas?
Well, firstly, Blair, my thanks to Bill for being over here, particularly to him and Nick Herbert, and I are very grateful for being part of the Police Leadership Commission, which we're co-chairing, and bringing some of your experience and wisdom to bear online and in person, and I'm very grateful personally for that. Could I just take a quick step back, because it reflects what your conversation, Blair, and you, Bill, have just been having, as to when we came into office in 97 and Jack's Crime and Disorder Act in 98, which shouldn't be forgotten because it did reflect some of the things you've been talking about, not least in terms of partnership and inclusion and people knowing what was going on and others being part of sharing to do something about it. The context of the 1970s and 80s was very much that you couldn't really prevent crime. You used the word societal, Bill, that those were the causes, and therefore prevention was really out with the powers of the Home Office or the police. And the very successful Home Secretary, Roy Jenkins, actually was revered for what he did. I have to say, he did a really good job on being able to make space for private members' bills. Bill, you might not have come across the name Roy Jenkins, but he was remembered for the abolition of capital punishment, for the decriminalisation of homosexuality, and for changes on abortion. All three of those were private members' bills. We're a bit on this at the moment because the present government haven't made space and time for the assisted dying bill, which is another big societal change. And the reason I'm mentioning it is because it wasn't until Michael Howard was Home Secretary and Jack Straw was his shadow that there was an appreciation that actually we could make a difference. We could actually. I had my disagreements with Michael Howard, but there was no question whatsoever that he had grasped that there were measures we could take that would make a difference. And I had dinner with Roy before I took on the Home Secretary's job in 2001, facilitated by a biographer of his who never published his book because Roy's widow, Jennifer, didn't want it published for very good reasons. And so when I came in, Blair, to answer your question, I got a bit of an understanding of what had taken place, and I'd heard of the great Bill Bratton. And I said, if we're going to do this properly, and we understand better CompStat, and therefore the use of data and the real-time focus on what's going on, then we better get him across. Jack had been, you kindly came across. Was it popular? Was it hell? The commissioner of the Met Police at the time, not his deputy, who was quite welcoming of the whole idea of reconstituting neighbourhood policing, neighbourhood teams, but the commissioner was really so dischuffed with me, he never actually forgave me for doing this, because it looked as though I was saying that there were people who knew better. And your experience was an absolutely fundamental impact on me in terms of knowing that we could do better. And so I invited someone who was a great fan of yours, Paul Evans, who'd been the police chief in Boston, to come and head the police standards unit, which was later abolished and has now been reinvented in a new guise. In government, and this is just true of crime and justice as it is of anything else, the tide comes in and the tide goes out. And we never seem to actually say, why don't we have some continuity? Why don't we actually learn from the past and apply it to the future, which is what we're trying to do on the Commission, in terms of understanding the causes. And prevention of crime and disorder is something that we'll have to emphasise very strongly, reflecting the future. So that, Blair, is where we were coming from. Tony Blair was very clear that we did need some targets because he believed we had too many, by the way. I mean, you get carried away. It was true of initiative fighters, which Louise Casey criticised in her report. I used to say we've got more pilots than we have over Heathrow. We needed to focus and to be very clear what the basics were. Again, Louise put in her report that getting the basics right was fundamental to getting everything else right. And that's what you've just been talking about, Bill and Blair, in terms of what was going on the ground and how you deal with it. And then you can build from there with entirely new forms of crime, which are overwhelming the police service at the moment. But it still matters to the public that they can see that you understand what they're feeling. It's why we introduced a major drive on antisocial behaviour. I don't know what the stats are at the moment on the new version of what we called ASBO's, antisocial behaviour orders. But there's one thing was absolutely clear, that the combination of measures and the partnership with community safety, with local authorities and with others, actually did make a massive difference, 50% drop. And it wasn't by accident, it was because we'd learnt from you and we'd learnt from good policing here in the UK, and we had good people who were prepared to put it into practice. But not everybody warmed to it. It was kind of, why don't you just leave us alone? In fact, I had that in the political arena. If I'd only stopped talking about crime, it would have gone away. That was said to me from the Treasury. Mind you, they had a vested interest because they didn't want to invest in it. And my great strength, and this is something that you shouldn't underestimate, was having the Prime Minister on my side. And made a very big difference. But in the end, we were saying crime has something to do with all of us. We're empowering and requiring the police to be involved with the prevention of crime and disorder, but we've all got a part to play as well. So, yeah, poverty didn't equal crime. It certainly made it more justifiable in other people's minds, but it wasn't. I was brought up in poverty, and the idea that we would rob each other was ridiculous. So, these things come round again, don't they? And here you are, all these years later, 30 years on, and we're still talking the same things.
Yeah, thank you. So, David, you mentioned the Leadership Commission. I should say that the Police Foundation is a research partner to the work that the Commission is doing.
Very grateful to the Foundation, Blair, for being part of that and giving us enormous support and drawing down on the work that you did with Professor Michael Barber as well.
Absolutely. So I was going to ask you, because I know you were Home Secretary, you would have spent a lot of time with the police at that time. You then went on to other roles in government. Leadership Commission now brings you back to policing, I guess, for the first time in many years, and you've been visiting forces and talking in focus groups with frontline officers. So I just wonder whether you've reflected at all on, now you're back seeing policing, what's changed, and after all this time, are there things that still concern you about policing?
Well, I've learned more about policing in the last 6 months than I did in the near 4 years I was Home Secretary. I think partly because people will now tell you the truth, and when you're making visits, you can actually sit down with sergeants and inspectors, and they know it it's not the Home Secretary, and they know there's not going to be that kind of reverberation, and we gave them absolute assurances of confidentiality, and people have talked and reflected, and I've got two quite contradictory things out of it. One is that there's great stuff going on, and the commitment of police officers at every level to wanting to do a damn good job is palpable. But secondly, they are actually disillusioned within the service. I won't go into it now because we need to coalesce the balance between the two when we do the report. But there are some serious things that we are trying to address in the police service that will enable officers to do their job better and to have greater confidence in the leadership of the service and to make the job of the leaders more effective and more rewarding. And so there's a lot to go at and a lot of learning. I mean, I said to Bill just before we came on that I was still learning, and you said, you know, every day we should be learning. And part of the problem when you're in government is that you're under the cosh and you're dealing with daily issues. I mean, the last few weeks of my government have been a nightmare. When you're Home Secretary, you wake up every morning and there's something that has gone wrong. And you tend to be dealing with the here and now rather than reflecting on the broader issues and where you're going. And we've desperately tried to do both, to actually deal with the here and now in an era where the internet and 24-hour news was only just emerging. It's a nightmare for them now. And it's a nightmare for the police because you're put on the spot. We haven't put this yet as a possible recommendation, but I actually think that senior police officers require a course in media handling because it might actually save them a lot of heartache. Their life has become much more difficult, as has, to be honest, politicians.
Thank you. I was actually going to ask you about politicians and police chiefs. So, and then I'll turn back to Bill. But you had some famous run-ins with chief constables as well in your time. I'm thinking about Nottingham and then also Humberside, and also the reaction to bringing in outsiders like Paul Evans. I think that was a bit of a pushback as well.
Yeah, the Home Office was sceptical. The police were deeply sceptical. I mean, the Home Office were totally sceptical about the idea that we could have an impact from the centre, other than just giving people more resource, which is a good thing, but in itself, if it's not focused and directed, it is likely to lead to disillusionment. And I'm just going to say this, I was breathtaken from 2010, and I think Nick Herbert, who's summing up this morning, shares this view, that a Conservative Home Secretary, who I actually liked as a person, had allowed the Treasury to cut the budget so much that some of the continuity disappeared as the resource disappeared to do it. And that struck me as amazing for a historic party of Peel. So, you know, we learn and then we unlearn, and we've got to keep on actually learning and building on what's come before. We can do it. It's perfectly doable. I've mentioned already, Blair, that I didn't get on with John Stevens. I mean, he didn't get on with me, so we were chalk and cheese. And he wrote a book in which he got his own back, but that's another matter.
I don't know if this is a true quote, David. According to Mark Easton at the BBC, this is an article online from more than 20 years ago, you were once quoted in terms of the relative powers of chief constables, police authorities and the Home Secretary. You said, the chief constable gets all the power, the police authority gets all the money, and the Home Secretary gets all the blame.
Yeah, it was a bit of a caricature, actually, to be honest. I mean, there was a tripartite approach. I was a bit gung-ho, but there was some, I mean, when we report, you'll see why a Home Secretary might be concerned about things that the public don't know. I was concerned. So there was a Chief Constable in Sussex who lost the plot. We had the terrible Soham issues that reverberated from Humberside, which you've mentioned. We did have one Chief Constable, I won't say which force, it wasn't Nottinghamshire, where the Chief Constable had major psychiatric problems and nobody was dealing with it.
Right.
So these are tricky, really tricky issues. And if we hammer Chief Constables, nobody want to do the job. I mean, I'm amazed that people still want to be cabinet ministers. But if you hammer them, they want to do the job. If you leave them alone, then you'll get all the issues that come from a lack of accountability, because we're human beings and we're flawed.
Thank you. I want to turn back to Bill now and think more about the sort of current crime challenges before we ask the audience to come in. So, and Sara mentioned this as well with what's on the news this morning, that sense of safety being impacted by everyday signs of disorder and people experiencing shoplifting in front of them most obviously with what's happening with retail crime exploding. I'm thinking in London as well. It used to be, I mean, I was in the mayor's office over 10 years ago, and seeing trains graffitied was quite unusual in the underground. Seeing people move through carriages on the underground begging was very unusual in London, and now I would say it's quite common. And of course, anyone who's had a bike or a phone stolen in London knows that there's issues there with that kind of crime. But the context, of course, is that the Met continues to be very successful with high seriousness crimes. The homicide rate is now continuing to track down, and there's been good progress on other violence as well. So you've got this sort of tension, haven't you, between performance on serious crimes, which are very important but also rare, and the perceptions that people have of that, and then this everyday concern that we now have. Is there a sort of broken windows opportunity here to revive some of the frontline policing to focus on prevention, for example, in the retail crime arena, do you think?
Let me respond to that, but first let me, and I apologize, I should have done this at the beginning, to thank Lord Blunkett and Herbert for the opportunity to get contemporary once again with what's going on in British policing with the Leadership Commission, that I'm privileged to be one of the 10 commissioners that I've had the opportunity over the last 35 years to, in some respects, work in tandem with the British police services, learning from them, they on occasion learning from us. And my CBE from the Queen was in response to that effort to collaborate continuously. So I appreciate the opportunity for that collaboration to continue. And to Blair Gibbs and now his role with the Police Foundation. Blair's been a good friend in a multiplicity of environments over the years as he's worked his way through various assignments in British government. And it's been a pleasure to continue that relationship, and thank you for this opportunity this morning. In terms of the constant challenge of where to put emphasis, which is a challenge for police chiefs, chief constables, home secretaries, mayors in my country that are so involved in the day-to-day policing of their cities and communities, that Sir Robert Peel had it correct at the beginning that you had to focus on both at the same time, that you can't focus on just one and not the other. In the emergency trauma room, the doctor's going to certainly work on the life-threatening injury, but he's also looking at all the other things that are going to retard the potential to heal the patient. And I think what's going on in your country at the moment, and there's been a emergence of it in my country in the last several years, that there is a growing expectation on the part of the public that police need to be doing something about disorder once again. As reflected in the news this morning, the BBC, about the explosion of drug sales throughout the country, the issues of increased fare evasion. You call it, I think, living in the rough. We call it homeless in the United States. That the begging you're talking about. The public has a rightful expectation that something needs to be done about those issues. The challenge for the police is to do it within the limits in my country of our Constitution, in the limits of yours, the idea of the consent, common law. And it's probably more difficult to deal with broken windows than it is to deal with serious crime, being quite frank with you. It's one, there's so much more of it. Two, it is so much more visible to the larger population. think of a serious crime that, unless you're the actual victim or read about it, it doesn't necessarily affect you in the same way that things that you see every day that disturb you. And that was the challenge of dealing with broken windows, the recognizing that the public wants something done about that because it affects them every day. And in my country, even in the height of our crime explosion in New York City, 1 out of 10 New Yorkers were the victims of a serious crime. But the other 90% only read about it. What they all experienced, all 100%, was the disorder in the streets. So I'm happy to see that there's once again a return to the understanding that the police need to focus on both issues. The challenge for them is the constant challenge of budget, not enough of them. I had breakfast this morning with your Commissioner, Mark Crowley, and getting caught up in what the Met have been up to and what he's been up to. And his issue of concern, one of his primary concerns is his numbers. Yeah. That the department basically right now is significantly understaffed historically to some of the numbers they've had in the past. In my country, I had 38,000 police officers to work with when I was dealing with crime and disorder. That department is now down around 34,000. The Los Angeles Police Department is down at 8,400 officers. I had 9,200 to work with when I was there, grew it to 10,000. So the understaffing of policing as the expectation of the police has grown. And that expectation has grown. We have shown that when we focus on this issue of crime and disorder, we can be effective. We can hold people accountable for basically what they're expected to deal with. But the challenges and frustrations are extraordinary. But this is where the essentiality of policing in a democracy requires, and this is where Sir Robert Peel once again identified it, is police can't do it alone, public can't do it alone, but collectively they can, in the sense of the whole ethos of my country, and I believe in yours, of community policing, neighborhood policing, was built around the idea of partnership between, and you're attempting to do this with more nationalization of your police services, the better collaboration between the many aspects of the law enforcement community, partnership with the community, business and residential. The idea, and that partnership is intended to identify what are the problems and priorities that people want addressed. At the moment, it's quite clear that your public, in my country, same thing, people once again want to return to more being done about these quality of life issues, the shoplifting, which is a plague in my country. I understand the same thing here, fare evasion in the public transportation systems, disorder on the streets, drug dealing, and how to do it in a way that we don't have a negative impact on the populations that sometimes are most affected by those issues, in the sense of poor neighborhoods, our minority neighborhoods. And because there is still, unfortunately, so much crime, disorder in those neighborhoods, we tend to bring more police into the neighborhood, and thus the challenge of police having more exposure to those communities, the essentiality of policing that's done constitutionally lawfully, but also done compassionately. That you're dealing with people, no matter what their status is in life. And thirdly, consistently, that you're not policing Hyde Park differently than you might be policing one of the poor neighborhoods. And that's where the system of accountability and CompStat comes into play, the idea of data, so that you can keep track of why there's so many complaints in this precinct and so few in this precinct. This is something happening the way the officers are performing. So it's an exciting time, once again, in policing. I wish I was 10 to 20 years younger, that I'd be back in the game, back in the saddle again.
You'd frighten them to death, wouldn't you?
But what is so interesting about where we are in 2026 is the world of technology. Both the challenge it creates in terms of new forms of crime. Back in Sir Robert Peel's day, and indeed my time in the 1990s, we dealt with crime and disorder. Actually, we did not deal effectively with crime, and we weren't dealing with disorder at all. And when we did start to deal with both of them and hold people accountable, we were successful. 9/11 created something you had a lot of experience with the IRA, terrorism, and the focus in the U.S. had to expand to terrorism activities. But just think of all the things that you expect the police to deal with now. in terms of all the technological cybercrime issues, AI, the whole revolution, that's going to create new types of crime to deal with, new techniques to deal with it. An extraordinary time to be an inventor or a risk taker in the law enforcement world. All the tools that you get to use and the challenge to use them lawfully, consistently, and compassionately.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. If you can show your appreciation, we'll move to the next panel.
So, what a fascinating conversation that was. And I hope we're going to, in fact, I know we're going to continue with another fascinating conversation with my panellists. And I'm just going to go down the line. If you could just very briefly introduce yourselves, like name and main job role, I think will be helpful. Gloria, you first.
I'm Gloria Laycock, and I don't have a job. I'm retired. Formerly, I was head of the Home Office Police Research Group until I handed it over to somebody else and eventually ended up establishing the Jill Dando Institute of Crime Science at UCL. So I've had two great careers, one in the Home Office and one in academic life.
Thanks, Gloria. Matt.
Good morning, I'm Matt Twist. I'm Assistant Commissioner for Frontline Policing in the Met, and I'm the NPCC Chair of the Performance Management Coordination Committee.
Very well qualified today. Catherine.
Good morning, everybody. Obviously, frightfully jealous of Gloria, but I am a Chief Constable of Wiltshire Police. I also hold the National Policing Lead for Children and Young Persons.
Getting close. Denis.
Denis O'Connor. I oversaw as Chief Constable the development of the research around neighbourhood policing in this country and the trial across 8 police forces, and subsequently was Chief Inspector of Constabulary. And I have a passing acquaintance with Cambridge University and Larry Sherman, who's in the audience I see here now.
Brilliant. So what a great, diverse panel. I'm going to ask them all the same question. It's pretty broad, and hopefully they can take it wherever they want. I'm going to start off with Denis, because he's just commented on the work that he did. But Denis, what do you think now the broken windows approaches have to offer us today? And maybe you reflect a little bit on the work that you did on all the signal crime and neighbourhood policing.
Okay. Cutting to the chase, I think there's 2 things really to focus on. One is we identified it's in the same family basically as broken windows. The idea of signal crime really matters to people, and Bill's already elaborated on that because they all see it. The issue is what signals. So the work that we oversaw at the time was to discover those signals, and Martin Innes, who is associated with Police Foundation, Martin actually identified signals for me, for us, across 8 police forces. Here we go. If you look at these, this changed my way of thinking about public confidence. If you look at this chart, it basically looks across 16 wards. And if you look at the top 3, what's immediately striking to me is that a lot of this is disorder, as has already been said. I doubt very much it's that different now. And they vary, the signals, across wards. Although if you look at X and Y, drugs and drugs, one is a high-rise block of flats with an awful lot of ex-drug addicts, and one is a comfortable suburban area. They've got different definitions, and they've got different hot areas within those neighbourhoods. Okay. That's what we discovered. 1. 2, as I've mentioned already, the variation was something you had to be aware of because of different cultures and different contexts in the area you're in. Otherwise, as Bill says, you can over-police an area. And then the last one really is they're all about public space. They're not about private crime. So in essence, what people see and experience at least is equivalent to the statistics that everybody spends so much time looking at. For ordinary people, this is what they look at. This is what influences them. We developed a series of tactics from that, which are essentially things that I'm sure Bill would recognize. Knowledgeable presence in those areas, 1. 2, responsiveness to the signals that they're sending. And that's easier if you've got concentrations and they're highly salient ones. And then the third third wing of it was control. It was actually using problem solving and or enforcement to do something about them. It'll be evident why I'm saying that in a moment. So that was a discovery. It was rolled out. It gained 15%, believe it or not, in 1 year, 15% increase in confidence in the areas subject to the trial. It then rolled out nationally, and the rest is history in that one. What do I think about it now? Because we've got limited time. Now we're at a point. Peak neighbourhood policing was about 2/3 of people had confidence in local policing, and more than that in some places. Now it's running at the low 50% and less than that in some places. Our USP is supposed to be policing by consent. This matters, because confidence is the route to consent. I think there's several things we can do about that, and I'll be interested in what Matt's got to say and other colleagues, but the things that occur to me are these. Yes, neighbourhood policing is depleted over what it was. We've already mentioned that with the resource issues. But it's also been subject and affected by all the new demands that the leadership team are looking at, and by our own focus on the harm paradigm. Because there are trade-offs. If you do one thing, probably you're going to do less of something else. What can we do? I think we should implement the evidence of neighbourhood policing, not weak versions of it. That means presence, yes, responsiveness and engagement, but not exclusively, also control. That's not happening in a number of places to my personal knowledge, and they are expensive resources. The second thing is, I think, the balance of our performance review now by the inspector and others, because of all the things that we have discovered, is a lot about demand management, which people have to do. If you've got less, you've got to manage it better. And Tom's in the room, and he knows a lot about that. And it's also a lot about managing harm. The external harm from corrosive insecurity and disorder, it gets less salience in that process and in other processes. We have moved into that domain almost unthinkingly, less in the public space, a lot more in the private space. And then the third thing is, I think you forces really have to know their signals. If you learn one thing that I would add to what Bill's already said about broken windows, some broken windows matter a lot more than others. Best you know them, especially in an age when we can accelerate the people's cognizance of them, we can amplify them, we can distort them in an instant. I'm for policing by consent, and I think that's the route. Still is, always was. Thank you.
Thank you, Denis, setting us off very thoughtfully there. Just looking at your diagram here, and you mentioned new technologies, do you think if you did these assessments again that they would change? Because presumably these are kind of 15 years old.
Yeah, these are 20 years old.
20, okay.
This was used to help brief ministers as to why, crime's going down, but the public don't believe it. Why?
Yeah.
This.
Yeah.
Look at this. This is why. I think they would change.
Yeah.
But, having spoke to Mark Rowley about it recently, Matt may contradict me. Basically, you still got antisocial behaviour, you still got drugs, but you've also got e-bikes, you've got brazen shoplifting. You do not need to be Einstein, but I do think we need to sort of interrogate it again. I think it's vital work if you want to focus what you do to get some success.
Thank you. So, Gloria, you were looking at all this happening from your eyrie in the Home Office and then leading the Jill Dando Institute. What's your take now? Is it relevant today?
Yeah, I mean, I'm the academic. I feel like Daniel in the Lion's Den, I have to say.
We like academics.
Yeah, interestingly, you do now. But in 1992, the police hated them, and I was from the Home Office saying, I'm here to help. It didn't go down well. Anyway, relevant now. I think it depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to reduce fly tipping, then dealing with dumped mattresses on streets, clear it up, and it's not for the police to clear it up. It's for the police to tell somebody, like the local authority, to clear it up. That's why partnerships are so important. But my interest is in reducing crime more broadly, and just generally, I'm not sure broken windows is the way to deal with that. I want to make 4 quick points. First, on crime. It's dropped dramatically over the past 30 years. In the UK, car crime, domestic burglary and violence are all down by over 80% compared to what they used to be. Antisocial behaviour is down, theft generally is down, although I will admit shop theft isn't a current issue. Having said that, there was a great project in the Met last year that went to the Tilly Awards, the Problem Solving Awards, and they dealt with shop theft. It can be done. What's gone up, and we've mentioned this already, is computer-related crime. And I don't think a broken windows approach is going to do anything about that. And for that matter, some of the future crimes, which the Dawes Institute at UCL is looking at now, the crimes that are going to be driven by Bitcoin or AI or graphene or all these other amazing things that are being developed. So we're trying to get ahead of the game on that. And we know from years of research there are 5 main ways to reduce crime. Increase the effort, increase the risk, reduce the rewards, reduce provocation, and remove excuses. It's not okay to say, I'm a drug addict, therefore I committed a crime. That's not okay. These notions can help you to decide how to respond to crime. But what you need is a thorough analysis of that problem. You can't solve a problem if you don't know what it is. And that brings me to my 3rd point, really. And it's something that Bill was just so incredibly important in promoting. I'm going to talk about it's ComStat. Why? Because together with emphasizing prevention, ComStat emphasized data. And
Don't worry, for some reason the blinds are moving up and down.
I'm okay. I wondered what was going on. Gloom was descending on the audience. I mean, going to ComStat, I thought it was astonishing that commanders didn't know what the crime picture was in their area. That was astonishing. And at the time, I mean, all the UK police were rushing to see how this miracle was happening in New York City. I was in the Home Office and I was incredibly irritated by this. Because at that time in 93, 2 per 100,000 murders. In New York, 26 per 100,000 murders. I thought, why aren't they coming here to hear what we do? I thought, on reflection, maybe I was being a bit unfair. I think what ComStat did, which to my huge annoyance I couldn't do, was emphasize how important it is to look at the data and to understand the problem and to do what Bill did brilliantly. I mean, when a real high-profile, hugely respected police commissioner says data matters, the police listen. And that's the massive difference he made. And he mentioned prevention, and we've been banging on about that for years. And the police had crime prevention officers who pootled around looking at locks and levers and mortise locks and had courses at Chubb lock factories and things, instead of looking at the data. So, what works is problem solving. I mean, Larry Sherman, absolutely spot on. Evidence-based policing, problem solving, learning, and base that problem solving on good analysis of good data. And lots of the police data is still pretty poor. So, problem solving is a strategy. It's not a tactic, it's a strategy. And broken windows type approaches are tactics that can be incorporated. And that's not to say that looking at the data excludes things like antisocial behaviour or the sort of things that Denis has just mentioned. Whatever the problems are, including those that are the focus, particularly including those that are the focus of communities in general, those are the problems that the police need to deal with. But they need to do it with an open mind and look to work in partnership with other people. And just in deference to what David was saying earlier, the Crime and Disorder Act was a great act, and it's kind of slipped out of the focus these days. But yeah.
Thank you, Gloria. Really thoughtful comments. So now we move to the present, probably, rather than those of us who have been around these issues for a long time. Matt, what's your take on broken windows now from the position that you have, an important position as Assistant Commissioner of what I would call territorial policing, which is basically all the boroughs, I assume?
So it's the 12 BCUs, all of the boroughs, 32 boroughs of London and specialist crime, so dealing with everything from antisocial behaviour to serious and organised. I think the first thing to say is the CompStat bit lives on. Every 4 weeks I get my BCU commanders, each of them responsible for between 1,200 and 1,600 officers, into one place, into one room, and we go through the data and we see who's performing well, who isn't, where the trends are moving, and then take action. So CompStat definitely lives on. I think we've touched a number of times on demand is up and demand is different to 30 years. So looking back sort of to 1982 and broken windows and the 1990s, the policing mission is more complex. Certainly in London, we have a greater ever capital city demand, but reduced funding for it, pro rata, and people that just watch the news will see that every single day. The mission has changed more from the streets to private spaces, where we've had significant success now in dealing with some of the most pervasive crimes, domestic abuse, serious sexual assaults, coercive control, and now even more so onto the internet, where crimes that have always existed are now being prosecuted and enabled at a truly industrial scale. So in London, and it's been mentioned, we focused heavily on the harm for a period of time and have had significant success in reducing homicide, serious violence, lowest homicide rate in 10 years last year. Lethal barrel discharges reduced by 50%. And on serious sexual harm, rape, I think the inspectorate didn't quite believe me. In fact, they thought it was a typo, where for a moment in time we are top of the country for detecting positive outcomes for rape, which is an astonishing achievement and testament to the work done. But now we look at broken windows and we look at neighbourhood crime. And as the organisation has shrunk, and we've shrunk by over 3,000 officers and staff in the last 2 years, and probably 4,000 if you expand that timescale beyond that, and are likely to shrink further, the important thing is that we are not shrinking equally. So in our balance of investment, we are actually increasing the number of ward officers that we have. We're still, of course, going to focus on homicide, although we've reduced the number of teams as we've got some evidence of a peace dividend. And we're still going to invest in public protection because we know it's so insidious and so pervasive and actually so underreported. Today's issues, I think, are things that we've mentioned already, though. They're things like retail crime, they're phone snatching, it's e-bikes. And where we have put people in a place, where we have done things like clear hold build, we've invested working with partners in a location, we've seen some absolutely fantastic results. In Westminster, the city of Westminster, which actually drives a lot of the crime because of the capital city function, week on week, this week compared to the same year last week, we've got about a 45% reduction in theft person and phone robbery because of the effort that we've put in terms of dealing with the problem locally, investing and looking at the levels, not just from the low-level, high-volume people that are stealing phones on the street, but to the handlers that are packaging them up and wrapping them in foil to give them to the exporters that are then shipping them to North Africa and China. So by dealing with all of these three levels and bringing together organised crime into the local community and our organised crime effort and the techniques and tactics that we use in that, locally, in places like the West End and in places like the Graham Park Estate, where we've had significant reductions through clear hold build, we are making a difference. And the principle of broken windows lives on, albeit the practice, I think, looks very different today than it did some years ago.
You called it clear hold build, that's the kind of the strategy, and you presumably focus on a particular hotspot area to do that.
Exactly. So this is a partnership effort with local authorities, and we can't do it on our own because the police can clear quite easily. And what we do is we pick a small number of locations. At the moment there are 8. where we invest significant effort across local resources, specialist crime resources, and partner effort to look at those individuals that are causing the crime, the antisocial behaviour, the people that are sort of blighting people's lives. And you could see in places like Graham Park, high shootings, high violence, high criminal damage, high antisocial behaviour, high drug taking. Bringing to bear all of the Met's resources, and this is something that will be important for police reform, that regional or local chiefs have the ability to lean in with organised crime resource to a local area can make a really significant difference, and we can clear the problem. And we've locked up significant numbers of people. The next stages, though, are equally important. We can, once we've done that clearing, once the people that are the most significant perpetrators are in prison, hopefully, we can hold it for a period of time. But we then need partners, local authorities, education, children's services, adult services, others, to step in and actually build a better infrastructure and environment to exactly the point of broken windows that's going to design out the crime for the future. And I think it's fair to say we've been effective at clearing and to some extent are pretty effective at holding. I think the jury's still out on whether we've yet been effective at building. And unless we are effective at building with partners, then effectively we're just going to be going back around the same loop again when the people we've put in prison come out and return back to the places where they once terrorised.
That point about the difficulty in building, is that because of lack of, what's the word, intention, lack of their wanting to do it, or is it a resource issue?
I think principally it's a resource issue. I think there's we've seen, and we look back to the sort of crime and disorder partnerships that some colleagues in the room will have recognised, and how over time the sort of investment of successive treasuries into policing has been eroded. And I think the same is true into some of that partnership space with crime and disorder. So I think that's the important point. I don't think it's that people don't want to do it, but I think there's a resource challenge. And obviously the more of this we do, we think it's the right approach, and it can definitely have, a really, really good effect. But we actually need to then sort of build on the gains that we make when we do take away those most dangerous perpetrators.
And we do know, in terms of data for local authority spend, certainly in England, there's so much money going on sort of late intervention, very little now as a percentage on earlier intervention and prevention work. So, Catherine, from kind of a very different setting, Wiltshire, probably not quite the opposite end of the spectrum to the Met, although I think you were Met before that, weren't you?
I was, and I spent 23 years in the Metropolitan Police Service, and then I joined Wiltshire Police as Chief Constable 3 years ago.
Okay, so what about broken windows application in what is a largely rural force and quite a large geographic area as well?
So I was thinking long and hard about this question, because actually the principles of broken windows applies as equally to Wiltshire, and I can see other representatives of other rural forces in the room as well, and it applies equally to us as it would to the Met. I think what we do with it is different. And part of the reason what we do with it is different is because I have 1,203 police officers, the 3 is very important, for the whole of Wiltshire. To put that into context, when I was the BCU commander of Islington 10 years ago, I had 1,500 officers for a very small geography. Now, of course, in Wiltshire, I have 1,300 glorious police staff as well, working really hard in their corporate services roles to enable the frontline policing. But ultimately, I have a lot fewer numbers of police officers and high visibility options across a larger area. So where we have to lean into much more that community engagement, how we need to lean much more into our volunteers, both the policing volunteers such as specials and our other volunteers, but also our watch schemes and our community volunteers to make sure that we can really galvanise about delivering the principles of broken windows, the principles of making sure communities can enjoy their environments. I think we need to do that a lot more. And coming back to Matt's point, policing cannot do this by itself, and it needs its stakeholders, its partners and its communities to really make sure we're successful in making sure people can enjoy their beautiful communities, but also making sure that we hold it. And we have had focus areas such as Clear Hold Build, where we have tackled serious and organised crime in Wiltshire as well, but actually those basic principles and making sure that we work together to ever improve our environment is really important. And I'm really grateful to the grid you put out right at the beginning, because actually your point that drugs issues were affecting a inner city area as much as as a rural area is absolutely the principle of Wiltshire today. There's nothing that happens in London that doesn't happen in Wiltshire. It might just look and feel a little bit different. And actually, we see a lot of, say, for example, county lines, which obviously embodies itself into the broken windows theory as well. Actually, there's a direct link, isn't there, between what's happening in London and what's happening in Wiltshire because of the geography of the M4 and other public transport networks. So that's part one of my thoughts. The second part is, as I say, I am fortunate to have the honour enough not only to be Chief Constable of Wiltshire, but also to be the National Policing Lead for Children and Young Persons. And I see many of my national community in the room there as well, and it's lovely to see you all. But the principles of broken windows actually underpin the National CYP strategy, which we launched a few years ago. We very much anchor in the fact that we can't police our way out of this problem, that actually we need to really mobilise young people, support young people, to find a way to empower them. By the way, not, coming back to your point, to make excuses for bad behaviour, to make excuses for criminal acts, but actually holding people to account, but enabling them to make sure that they are empowered. So our National Children and Young Person strategy is very much factored into your voice, your trust and your future. How can policing and its partners make sure that we truly invest in our young people, to make sure that they are empowered to make good choices, take responsibility and accountability where they make bad choices, and how we can support them out of it to truly have a future? And my final thought is, of course, broken windows is as relevant today as it ever was, because, of course, that's the foundations of the local policing areas that we're discussing with the White Paper and the future reform. How can we make sure that with all of the changes that policing must go through, that we really protect that local delivery, we really protect how we engage with our local communities, and how those local policing areas will still inspire the trust and confidence of our communities, but also making sure that we tackle those broken windows theories and we're ever in that prevention space, because of course by the time we're tackling it, we will never arrest our way out of it.
Thank you. Can I just kind of draw together the comments that you were making, Gloria, about, crime has never been lower, and the stats you gave us, Matt, in terms of the Met, particularly about the serious crimes, and pick up on that question Blair asked Bill, I think, in the last session. So in many ways, the numbers look like they're going the right way. But then Denis talked about confidence levels. It sounds like we've all listened to Radio 4 this morning and heard about being able to buy your cocaine and cannabis in the high street in, where was it, Sandwell or wherever it was, in the West Midlands. And, the sense living in London of, you just cannot get anything delivered because it'll be nicked from your doorstep. The amount of little photographs on our street WhatsApp with hooded people taking anything off the doorstep, a sense in which, people are just pushing past the barriers in tube stations, and, you can't go into Sainsbury's and get your chocolate out without a plastic box around it because they're so worried about it being stolen. So how do we kind of live with this tension that, as Boris Johnson once said to me, it's like, the mayor in Jaws, isn't it, saying it's safe to go back in the water. We're saying crime's down, but actually that's not the experience of a lot of people locally, whether that's in London or elsewhere. How do we live with this tension? What do we say to people to reassure them? What do we do in terms of the strategy? I mean, Matt, probably to you first, and then maybe Denis?
So I think the most important thing for us is precision. I think it's really, we also have to bear in mind the context in which we operate. The context in which we operate is one where there are people, politicians, malign actors, and to some extent, I'm sure, hostile states looking to destabilise and to say that everything's going to hell in a handcart in London, and that isn't the truth. Of course, crime is high, and we want crime to continue to come down. And I think, again, whether you're looking at national figures or London figures, we've seen a 15.3% reduction in neighbourhood crime this year, which is really significant. Our phone theft, our theft person is reducing, and yet you'll see stuff online saying that you're going to get your phone stolen in London sort of every 2 seconds. But we have to be precise, and I think, for me, the most important thing in the last 2 years of doing this job is making sure that our neighbourhood officers, where we do invest in them, are community crime fighters. They're not sitting, they don't see their role as engagement, they see their role as fighting crime, and they're in so doing engaging with the community. because the community want to see us doing our job. They want to see us arresting the thieves, the people in Sainsbury's or Waitrose or wherever stealing the food. And I think the second point on that is technology, in that given we're a shrinking organisation and that actually demand is going up and we're encouraging in some areas increased reporting like retail crime, domestic abuse, serious sexual offences. For retail crime, it's use of technology, it's use of things like retail crime reporting platforms, whereby we've started this now in the southeast of London and we're rolling it out across the rest of the capital, whereby there's an online platform whereby retailers can report, and it links the series of offences that one person has done, because, as is ever the case, it's a very small number of people that can commit a very large amount of the crime. So we're seeing cases now where we can prosecute someone for 30, 40, 50 offences with very short amount of time. It doesn't take a huge amount of officer time to do this because the system draws it all together. Things like, as we saw this week, live facial recognition, being able to use that in the sort of really important court case that was won this week, enables us to be more precise and actually target it in neighbourhoods, only those people that are wanted, which is really important. So I think technology has to play a part in this, but also understanding that people are worried, and our message to them is that our neighbourhood policing is increasing as our balance of investment, as part of the wider organisation, and we are going to be focused on community crime fighting because we know people are worried about it.
Thanks. Denis.
Well, I suppose I have the advantage and disadvantage of not being immediately in touch with it all. But some things are as old as time, and we've already heard it today from Bill. Peel, in his list, or the list attributed to him, advised officers, and I remember as a very young officer in the Metropolitan Police with my instruction book that the confidence of the public was a hugely important issue. Mm-hmm. We haven't heard a lot about it here, I have to say. With the public confidence, anything's possible. Without it, it's very, very hard. Mm-hmm. We all know areas where that's true. We know concentrations where it's difficult. Sometimes they coincide with crime, sometimes disorder. Why am I saying all this? I think you can do a certain amount with what I would call expeditionary policing, going into and out of areas, clear hold, build, all of that. But if we don't have some basic groundwork on confidence locally, then a lot of the things that have been said are good here are contradicted by what people see. Mm-hmm. So, and I don't think you can win that contradiction. Now, what could we do about that? Well, up to 2010, believe it or not, for a policing by consent country, confidence was an objective. After 2010, it became measured. There are all sorts of good reasons why that happened. I think we should revisit it. Because the prospect for me is not about relating to some sort of past, rosy window and everyone said evening all and it was all fine. Of course not. There were lots of things going on then. It's about the fact that we had to have some strategy for confidence as well as crime. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the strategy is for confidence at the moment, and I should, because I'm kind of keen on it. Maybe colleagues here can tell me. But I think restoring it to be at least on par with crime seems to me essential for a country that has a consent as its USP. Broken windows and the windows-related work on signal crimes is directly relevant to that. I think that we know some of what works, Gloria, on that. And we've had support for that, not just from the stuff I was talking about earlier, but from systematic reviews subsequently. It's time to put confidence back on the map.
Thank you. Catherine and Gloria, can you just very brief responses to this question?
Absolutely. So I don't disagree with anything that's just been said, but actually I think that this is about consistency. And this is about making sure that when people pick up the phone that we are there, if we are committing to being seen, that we are there. And certainly within Wiltshire, we have reconstructed ourselves all around highly visible neighbourhood policing. We have re-established dedicated neighbourhood policing teams. We provide consistency through community commitments into all of our areas to make sure that people can rely on our offer. And I think that is part of the way to try and rebuild that trust, rebuild that confidence. There are lots of complicated reasons why some of the crimes that you've described are going up. But actually, we need to be consistent in our response, whatever that response is. And I think that's the way that we can start paving that way back to that trust and confidence element. Because if people know that we are going to be there, then we can start having conversations about how we can serve them better.
Gloria.
I'm going to be really contradictory. I think the whole narrative around crime is wrong. Crime is going down, and the public need to be told that. It's been going down for 30 years, and the public need to be told that. It's still there, but we know how to deal with it. We've had great examples. And the strategy for confidence, tell the truth. Don't let politicians put the wind up everybody, all outvoting each other on how to deal with this problem, which is going down. And we know how to do it. Look, Bill gave a fabulous talk about what he did in New York City. It's been going down across all advanced Western democracies for 30 years, and if you ask the public, they all think it's going up. When I said I don't do anything, I do actually. I talk to old people at the U3A, the University of the Third Age. My talk is entitled Scientists or Politicians, Who Has the Answer to Crime? And it's not the politicians, with all due respect to them. The scientists, Larry, back me up here. Evidence-based policing is what we've got a lot of evidence, and it's building all the time thanks to people like Larry Sherman. And the Jill Dando Institute, obviously I love it, I set it up. There are people here from the Jill Dando Institute. I think we've got to change the narrative, and the media need to take note. We know what to do, it's great, we're all doing super well. Tell them. Sorry.
Would they believe the authorities saying that? I mean, I think the trust in authorities is... On that controversial note, I'm going to pull the panel to an end, and I think if we just stay where we are, and I'm going to invite Lord Herbert to come and make some closing remarks. Oh, thank you to the panel, by the way.
Well, thank you, Sara, very much indeed. And thank you so much to the Police Foundation for convening this incredibly interesting debate. I think we would all have enjoyed discussing this for a great deal longer. And the provocation for this debate has been the anniversary of Broken Windows Policing and Bill's visit to the UK, and I'll return to that. We have discussed, of course, the changing context in which policing operates today, the changing patterns of crime, the new demands, the new forms of crime, technological challenge, but also the opportunity that gives policing. And the government's reform proposals are an important attempt to answer these new challenges with a very big restructuring of the police that is underway right now. What, though, are the common themes that have emerged from the discussions that we've had this morning, the insights which David Blunkett and Bill gave us, and those of the panel? And I would say that the first of them is the issue of accountability. The importance of accountability, not just the accountability which forces and chief constables have, which has been a controversial issue for some years now, and the form of which is changing, but the accountability which every officer has, and the accountability which ensures that performance is constantly reflecting what the mission of the police needs to be, but reflecting the purpose of policing, which is to serve the public, and we mustn't lose sight of the public interest in all of this. Secondly, the issue of resources, which has been mentioned frequently by Bill, by Matt, by David. And I do think that in the overall scheme of things over the last few years, policing and criminal justice as a whole has been a relatively under-resourced budget within government compared to many others. If you look at the huge increase in resources for health, for education, for welfare, which we know about now, for defence, what stands out in that is the relative diminution of resourcing for local authorities, which of course have such an important function in relation to crime, antisocial behaviour, and so on, but of course for the criminal justice agencies themselves. And there has been a seesaw of resources, and that's been problematic for the police service. But in overall terms, policing has not been given the same level of priority by successive governments as have the other great public services. And that's something, I think, for politicians to reflect on. And it leads me to my third observation about what we've been discussing, which is the importance of political support for the police. Bill mentioned the necessity to have a common plan with those to whom he was answering. And where that political support has been given, and I think particularly of the period where neighbourhood policing was built so determinedly under the Labour government, and David talked about that, then I think the job of the police has been made a great deal easier. That political support, I think sometimes we can feel beginning to ebb away in terms of the political discourse about policing. And for all the problems that there are in policing, I sometimes think that the level and tenor of criticism about the police service you would not find in the discourse about other public services. I often observe, as we're here at RUSI, that in our public debate, the armed forces sometimes, it seems, can do no wrong, but the police can do no right. And that discourse is in itself quite corrosive. But the willingness of politicians and the media to support policing does depend, it seems to me, on their perception that the police are delivering for them in their communities. And the mere exposition of raw statistics is not going to be enough to tell the public that all is well with them. And this brings us to the fundamental issue that we were discussing today, the principles of broken windows, policing, and the importance of delivering the basics for the public. And contrary, actually, to some of the remarks today, I think there has been a danger of uneven policing over the last few years, where sometimes forces have lost sight because of all the other pressures, because of the new demands, because of the resources pressures, of those basics which the public mind about. Not all forces have, but some have, and that has given rise to public concern. And today's event is a really timely reminder of the importance of focusing and delivering on those basics for the public. And to pick up on Sara's quote from the film Jaws, where the mayor tries to exhort the public to go back into the water, well, the fact is the water wasn't safe, was it? There was a huge shark which was going to eat people. And the mayor merely telling people that the water was perfectly safe to go into was not going to do. It was the police chief who knew that he had to do something about it. That brings me to the final point I want to make, and the point that enables me to circle back to Bill's presence here today. And that is about what I think is the most important ingredient for delivering any successful public service, and particularly, or no less, for delivering policing today, and that is the importance of great leadership. And by that I do mean leadership at every level of policing, the leadership that a constable can show, or a member of the police staff if performing an important duty, the leadership that a sergeant must show in the exercise of that vital first-line supervision, the leadership that inspectors and superintendents can show, and then, yes, of course, the leadership that chief constables and their teams must show. What do we know about what really makes a great school? It is a great head. The great head that sets the tone for the whole school. However good the teachers are, whatever the resources of the school, it is the great head that will make the difference. And the poor head will result in a poor school. The same for a hospital, and it's no less true for policing. And Bill is a wonderful reminder of the importance of having a great police leader. And sometimes when we find these great leaders, their achievements are dismissed. Oh, well, they had lots of resource. It was a moment in time. Oh, well, these things happened. But what Bill showed is that in force after force, he delivered, irrespective, actually, of the resources issue. I remember Bill moving from New York, where he had delivered this triumph in terms of a change in public confidence in policing the way the city was being policed, to Los Angeles, which had far less resource than New York. And he proved his critics were wrong, that it wasn't just about resources. It came from that vital quality of great leadership, of being able to lead his people, to give his people confidence, to give the public confidence, and to give those he was working for confidence too. And that is why Bill is such a great man. One of the ways in which we here in the UK recognise figures from overseas who performed a great service to us is, ironically, by investing them in an order like the CBE, which I notice Bill has, and I share with him very proudly. And I do think it's a tremendous irony that a citizen of the United States is a member of the Commander of the British Empire, and so on. But there are very few people who are given such awards, and the fact that Bill is a sign of what he has done, not just for policing in his own communities, but to help us over the years. And I'm proud that he is able to join us on the Police Leadership Commission today to give us his insight and the benefit of his own experience. But with typical modesty, much of the time Bill tells us how much he is learning from the Commission about what the policing is doing here in the UK. And it's important that we are not, we don't fall into the trap of thinking everything is better overseas and that we are not good at anything here. Actually, that's not the perception of British policing overseas, from overseas at all. But there are things we can learn, as we have heard today. And I'm very honoured to have Bill on that Leadership Commission, as well as some great serving police officers and others, and to be co-chairing it with David Blunkett. Today's a reminder of how that great leadership can improve policing, whether it's the political leadership that David showed, or whether it was the leadership from an inspirational officer like Bill. It's a reminder, of course, of the importance of the right policy, of evidence-led policy. It's a reminder that the issues can change. But above all, it's a reminder that it's the person that counts. It's the leader that counts. And that's why, Bill, this has been such a great event today. Thank you for joining us.